So this is a story all about how his life got flipped, turned upside down. I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there, and I'll tell you the story of a boy and his bear. So of course that boy is David, the bear is Teddy, this is AI, week 3 of Mechanical May. Now first off, I quickly want to state that I keep forgetting Kubrick's involvement in this. I always see it as Spielberg's AI, and then when his name comes up in the titles, it's a pleasant surprise. A lot of the dark ideas, imagery, deep thoughts probably are those stamps of Kubrick, and I probably should remember, but like I say, I keep forgetting. But onto the meat. So, like a lot of these films, you know, they're described as a tool, a means to an end. In this particular, they use the term sensory toy. And that does scale. You know, we have super toys like Teddy for the kids, and then we have toys like Joe and Jane for the adults. I'll not say any more on that, advertisers don't like it. But, you know, so we have society really integrated with these robots. Now, I did see something before doing this where someone was saying, you know, it doesn't get it quite right because they're too integrated. Now, to me, I disagree. They're not too integrated because they're not given equal status. They are still tools. They are just toys. They are a device. They are not seen as an equal. They are not seen as human or anything like that. They don't get the same level of treatment and sympathy because they are not seen as living. So I don't think that society is too accepting of them. And obviously this is completely discounting the flesh there because that's its own separate thing. But when we sort of open the film, you know, at Cybertronics, we have the discussion of creating David, as we find out later, but basically a robot that can love and be loved in return. And I find it interesting the ethical question is asked, you know, of is it right? Because we're on about creating something that can love. Now, if you're particularly cynical, you know, you possibly have the idea that love is just a bunch of chemicals causing a particular reaction. Robots can't replicate those chemical reactions fully. So it's only a program. It's like love.exe or love.bat, you know. It's not real love. But what if it was? You know, this is the difficult quandary. This is one of the big ethical questions, and you know, of the entire film, this is really the drive of the film. What if a robot could love? Now, one of the other things that's mentioned is once it imprints, that's it. That's forever. You cannot factory reset it. It's imprints forever. So the only way to get around that is to destroy it. Now, I think this is abhorrent. They're saying it can have an emotion, at least one, you know. And we have animals, say, as pets. They imprint on us strongly in some cases. And then if we need to move somewhere that we can't keep them, or we just physically, you know, we get ill and we can't keep them anymore, we don't destroy them, we try and rehome them. Even if we send them to a shelter, we try and find one that doesn't, you know, that has a no termination policy, if we're decent people. But we're saying that for a robot that is closer to a human, it's just that it doesn't have the flesh, blood and bone, is fine to be destroyed. Surely a reprogram could be done. You know, a factory reset. But I'm getting off topic a little. So, you know, this question does come up, and Professor Hobby's response really, I think, tells us everything we need to know about him. He is playing God, and he knows it. When he says,
"But in the beginning, didn't God create Adam to love him?"
He's clearly admitting that he thinks himself on a par to God. He's creating something to love him, or humans in general, in the same way that God created Adam. That's massive delusions of grandeur. That's megalomania. But then it's coming out of William Hurt's mouth, and you know, he's such a warm person, so I feel very conflicted. And of course we find later in the film, you know, his motivation for it. So it's one of those situations where it's like your ethical stance, I think, has actually fallen by the wayside to your emotional point, which is quite interesting, obviously, given the whole idea of this film. But of course, we get the family being chosen to get the prototype of David, to see how he works in a real setting. And of course, they don't have a dead child. You know, they weren't, you know, struggling to conceive. They just have a child who's really, really, really drastically ill, who may as well be dead, you know, in a lot of ways. And it's horrible to say that about a child, but or about anyone. But you know, it's one of those things that they've had to try and come to terms with, and Monica more so can't, and that's why, you know, it's a case of, yeah, we'll do it for her. So of course, when David arrives, he's very robotic, very mechanical, almost seems like waxy skin. And I don't know if there is a change in makeup, or if it's just my eyes and my perception, but I do feel that there is a slight change in makeup and how Haley Joel Osment does act after the activation, because that's the important thing here. You know, once he's activated, that's it, he's imprinted. Because of him being programmed to love unconditionally and strongly, it can come off a little creepy, and Monica does feel this a lot, you know, and I mean, no child is perfect. And I think they're almost under this illusion that because it's a robot, it's going to be more perfect than a normal child, which, you know, is a bit amiss. And obviously this is, you know, when he's given Teddy, you know, just to give him something to do so he's not just shadowing Monica constantly. But that's an interesting point, obviously, because Teddy is, I mean, I will get onto more about Teddy a bit later on, but Teddy's quite interesting because he's, you know, he's referred to as an older model. You know, sort of later on, and he actually has a lot of personality. He has wants, he has preferences, he has desires, he has fears. So even before they were imbuing robots with emotions, I mean, we don't know if he's a Cybertronics model or a competitor. At least I don't recall. But he's kind of alive, you know, he's got all these things, even though David's supposed to be the only one that's got a genuine human emotion programmed into him of love. So I find that interesting, and like, you know, as we'll see later on as well, you know, sort of a lot of the other robots, you know, that are running from the Flash, they're the kind of discarded ones, they all have wants and fears and things, you know, and it's this common thread. They've tried to create emotions in robots, but they've been able to do it by accident, effectively. Of course, the whole situation, you know, they kind of are able to live with David for a while, everything's fine. And then Martin miraculously, you know, gets better. And that's when everything goes wrong. This is going to sound awful, given that I said, you know, it's horrible to think of like a child being dead, or, you know, or being almost dead and things like that. But the whole panoply of issues that happen, you know, with David sort of having to go, well, David, you know, force feeding himself and breaking down, which is a horrible scene the first time watching it, and it gets a little easier each time because you know it's coming, but still not pleasant, with the like melty face. You know, all of these things, and like obviously eventually sort of being discarded, and you know, sort of his whole adventure, if you will, to find the Blue Fairy, does come from the fact that Martin returned. If Martin hadn't returned, I think David would have had a very successful trial, if you will, with the family, and it would have been fine. You know, Martin's return is the whole catalyst for everything that goes wrong. And like I say, it sounds awful saying it, but he'd been better off not coming back. Which of course ties it into the idea that, you know, sort of when it's originally being, you know, sort of developed, the idea that, you know, childless families, you know, whether that's through a child dying or whatever, would be the ideal. And of course, because as far as they were concerned, Martin's prognosis was so poor, it wasn't an issue, you know. And like I say, we wouldn't have, you know, the issues I don't think would have been there. But it's interesting how, despite me saying that Martin's almost like a catalyst for a lot of the bad, he's also a catalyst for David's sense of worth, David's motivation. He kind of, you know, sort of encourages the idea of Pinocchio being read, which really, you know, has a I don't know, like sparks something in David. This idea that, you know, he must have more than one emotion, surely. You know, where he's driven to seek out the Blue Fairy to be made into a real boy, because the only reason Mummy didn't want him anymore is because he wasn't a real boy. She got her real boy back and realised that actually that's better. So, but like I say, Martin gives this impetus by saying, read that one, David will love it. He's being mean, but he doesn't realise it. He's actually given him purpose, he's given him drive. And of course I did come back to Teddy. I think you're probably all figuring this out, but Teddy's like Jiminy Cricket. he's like the conscience and the sort of little aid, if you will, to David throughout this process of him seeking the blue fairy to be made into a real boy. He's one trying to guide him. I mean, they even go through Coney Island. The parallels to Pinocchio are there, and I like the fact that this continues that thread from Short Circuit 2 in particular, obviously because of the book. I do like the commonality that we're seeing in these films. So of course, obviously, once he's deposited out into the wild, an idea came to me as I was watching it. This idea that like she just is, I don't know, uncomfortable around him. She sort of upsets her to her core. And a thought came into my head, sort of linked to what I was saying about animals before. People can love and hate, and some people love really strongly and hate really strongly. But you can't just take them back. You can't just destroy them. I mean, obviously, with the people who hate strongly, that's why we have wars and stuff. But you can't just take people back to get disassembled or anything like that. But again, a robot is fine. I just wanted to, sort of put that in because I did sort of remember thinking that about the time that he's dropped off. And you kind of see this whole thing of when you start to look at it that way, that actually people are the bad guys here. You come to the conclusion, or at least I did, that David is actually screwed over by everyone here. David is, in fact, the victim. He is even more a victim than Martin sort of unintentionally being drowned in the pool. That was an accident. Just because he's a robot and is heavier and therefore doesn't have the buoyancy of a human. That's the reason that happened, and it was because of the other boys picking on him, and it's just horrific, the treatment that they go through. And then of course when he's being left autonomously without prompting, he's bargaining.
Oh, I'm sorry, I broke myself. I'm so sorry. I cut your hair off, and I'm sorry I hurt you.
No,
Mark and
I have to
and-
go. I
and-
have
no.
to go. Stop it!
Sorry.
No. I have to go.
Mommy, no. Mommy. Mommy, if Pinocchio became a real boy and I become a real boy, can I come home?
And it comes up again in the flash fair. He's begging for his life. It's heartbreaking to watch. If you see the Be Right Back sort of analysis I did, the scene towards the end is really heartbreaking. But that's prompted. David's above that. He's not been told to react like this. This is just him autonomously going, I don't want this situation. I don't want to be left here. And it's just so heartbreaking. And obviously in the flash fair, it's like, I don't want to die. He's crying. He's like a real human. And like I say, it's so sad. But of course, Gigolo Joe gets framed for murder. We sort of sidetrack away, once he's out in the wilds a bit. And he gets framed for murder, is on the run. They meet up and obviously get taken to the flesh fair. Obviously he briefly meets the kind of what I consider like the nanny bot, who's adorable, and obviously takes a shine to him. Again, a robot taking a shine to someone, surely not possible. But I found it quite interesting because I've just mentioned briefly Be Right Back, the Black Mirror episode, but we had Donald Gleason in that, and we have his dad in this. We got Mad Eye Moody. How brilliant! We got like dad and son in two things that I've covered, so I'm quite pleased with that. Of course, playing like the complete opposite, the one who hates all of these things. And of course, like I say, we get the flesh fair, and we have the issue with David sort of crying and getting the crowd on side. But it's interesting that they say they've made the mistake before of humans, being put in it. Now, does that not say to you that these mecha, as they call them, are a lot closer to humans than they'd like to admit? Because it does to me. That's what it sounds like. It's saying, well, sometimes we make mistakes because there are some really good models out there. So they are kind of closer than we may believe. Now, of course, with the flesh fair, we start to see a lot more of society's hatred, I guess, towards the robots or the mecha, and sort of how they see them. That like they are just programmed. They're not human. They may simulate it, but they're not. But then they fear capture. They fear, like the comedian one voiced by Chris Rock, fears being fired out the cannon. The nanny bot kind of fears, but she puts a brave face on for David. Again, that's all very human. Before the acid's poured on her, and again, another multi-faced thing that's quite horrific. So like I say, if they are just programmed, why would they fear? Why would they build attachments? There's more under the surface here. They think, like I said before, they think David is the pinnacle. They think David's the next evolution, but it's not. The robots have had this ability for a while. And one positive that really gives me a lot of hope for this future is, obviously, like I said before, when David's sort of pleading and crying at the Flesh Fair, the crowd are on his side. The crowd are throwing things like, no, he's just a boy. Surely that can't be a mecha. And I found that real positive. That even if they were accepting it's a mecha, they still couldn't have something that was like a child be destroyed. I mean, yeah, it'd be nice if they did it across the board, but luckily it gives them to get out. Both he and Gigolo Joe managed to get out there, and obviously Teddy as well. Managed to get out there and get away. And I did find a nice little sidebar as well. Phil Coulson's in this. Clark Gregg. I was like, hey, I know your face as one of the guys from Cybertronics, when they've located him. But yeah, so obviously, they go on this quest. They go and obviously try and find out how to find the Blue Fairy, how to get to her. And this was interesting to me as well. So Gigolo Joe, made for a purpose, is helping David. He's not programmed to, because surely children would be out of his remit anyway. I would really hope, because I wouldn't want anyone to program that kind of robot. Thank you. And he's just helping him out. He even gets a job offer come in, and he chooses to continue to help David. If he is just programmed as a pleasure droid, if you will, he should have just gone to the job and gone, sorry, duty calls, exit stage left. But he doesn't. He goes and actually helps David more. And one of the things he says to David, actually, which I really thought was a great thread, and is picked up, I think, at the end, in a way.
They made us too smart, too quick, and too many. We are suffering for the mistakes they made, because when the end comes, all that will be left is us. That's why they hate us.
So yeah, he nails it. We fear them because they remind us of our own mortality. Short of a catastrophic electromagnetic pulse, robots will be there long after the last human has drawn breath. And it's a very sobering thought. But, we get to the point where David makes it back to Cybertronics, and, Professor Hobby's delighted to see him. He's like, you're the best mecha I've ever created, I knew you'd make it back. But other mecha have shown similar traits. They've shown selflessness, a sense, an element of love, if you will. Self-motivation, self-preservation instincts. I think it's a confirmation bias, because David's being tested against those metrics. That's what he's looking for, and that's why he's seeing it. Other robots, it's a weird little quirk of programming, but it's the same. It's exactly the same end result. But of course, Professor Hobby is not the Blue Fairy, in case you didn't notice. And David is somewhat depressed, especially when he meets another version of himself and sees the massive factory line of other Davids. He's the test one, and these guys can now go out into mass production. That's almost as horrific a thought as the idea that robots will outlast us to him. So he jumps into the ocean. He just can't deal. And of course, he passes through Coney Island, like I mentioned, with Teddy, and sees the Blue Fairy, and prays and prays and prays for years upon years, until some spindly robotic creatures pull him out and thaw him and talk to him and let him know what's gone on, and find out what he wants. Now, with these creatures, they are clearly robotic, so it is fulfilling the prophecy that robots will outlive humans. Humans are long dead because of this great freeze, etc. But robotic creatures are on Earth. Now, are they an evolution of the mecha that we see, or are they extraterrestrial? It's never explicitly stated. I think there's possibly an element of both. I think maybe sort of extraterrestrials came and went, oh, there's some mechanical bits we could use and maybe tweak things around, or something like that. I mean, I might just be completely making something up there, but it's my idea and I like it, you know, that it's kind of a melding of the two ideas. But of course, you know, so they want to give him something that will make him happy. His happiness is paramount, because he's the only thing now that he's the only thing they can contact. They can discuss what life was like before the freeze. He's the only link back to that point in time, and they want him to be happy. And of course, you know, he's fortunately got that lock of hair that creeped his mother out. You know, Monica was creeped out massively by it, and that's part of the motivation of sending him away. But it made sure that he could have his last happy day. And he cries. Tears are shed by David. Before, you know, in this section, you know, tears are shed. Now, I don't know if Mecha can actually shed tears. I'm not sure if like tears were shed even when he was like crying and upset before, whether actually actual tears were there. But there are actual tears there in this last bit. You know, before obviously he does get the final day. And that to me was like, now you're a real boy, David. And then at the end of the day, he goes to sleep. Obviously, you know, because they could only revive Monica for one day, he goes to sleep with her. And for the first time in his life, as it's said, you know, manages to go where dreams are. And it's such a beautiful ending. You know, it's so... all of the hardships he's gone through, all of the difficulties he's faced, all of the heartbreak, really, that we've experienced with him. I mean, it's you know, it's a good, long film, but the journey you take with David just feels so rewarding at the end when, for all intents and purposes, now he's like a real boy. He's got his dream. So it's weird that we kind of, you know, have a Pinocchio story there, because next week's isn't too dissimilar, but a little bit older. So until then, as always, take care.